Psychiatric drugs are controversial. Some people take the drugs and find a benefit. Some people take the drugs and are harmed. And some people avoid them altogether. Medical journalist and author Bob Whitaker has uncovered a deception in psychiatry's claim of scientific progress.
While doing that series for the Boston Globe, I came upon a couple studies that belied that story of progress. One was a study by Harvard researchers that found that outcomes for schizophrenia patients today were no better than they had been in the first 30 years of the 20th century, which belies that story of progress. And then I came upon studies done by the World Health Organization, which twice found that schizophrenia outcomes were better in 3 developing countries, India, Colombia, and Nigeria, than in the US and other rich countries. They used the drugs differently. They used them acutely, in other words, to curb an episode of psychosis, but not chronically. They didn't keep people on the medications long term.
I didn't mind the medication, like I think a week of Zyprexa was all right, maybe even a month of it.
I myself don't take meds. For me, it's not helpful for me. But it might be helpful for them. But what I could say to them is, you know what? Find out all the information on what you're taking, why you're taking that, and then have an option whether you should take it or not.
At 2 years, the people who've taken themselves off aren't really much better than the people still on. But this is the moment in the literature that is so key. Between year 2 and 5, the off-med group improves a lot on every symptom: psychosis, anxiety, cognition, work-related, presence, whereas those on meds do not continue to improve. So it's between this year 2 and 4.5 where we see a natural healing process.
It sounds counterintuitive. Shouldn't taking psychiatric drugs fix the problem? In fact, we see that psychiatric drugs create a problem.
Once you went on an antipsychotic, it blocks dopamine receptors. Now your brain says, uh-oh, the drug is it's blocking my normal dopamine transmission. So I have to accelerate that transmission. I have to, do something to compensate for the presence of the drug. And what does it do? Well, the presynaptic neurons put out more dopamine than normal for a while. And now that compensatory mechanism seems to burn out after a while. But the receiving neurons, the postsynaptic neurons, increase their density of receptors for dopamine. So here was the bottom line. Before you go on an antipsychotic, you do not have a known abnormality in your dopaminergic system. After you do go on it, you have the very pathology hypothesized to cause the problem in the first place. And that's the same with antidepressants.
If a psychosis goes away and you have been forcefully treated with a drug, then you have nothing to compare with. And then you might think it's due to the drug because I was in a very poor shape and 4 weeks later I'm much better, so it must be because of the drugs. That's how people reason. And this is the very reason that we do randomized trials where half get placebo in order to find out, do these drugs work or not? And when we do these trials, we can see that neuroleptics actually do not work. It's a sad thing that some patients, they have this perception that they were helped. This is not to say that patients are never helped. Some people also feel helped by alcohol in a stressful situation, or opium. This doesn't tell us anything about whether alcohol or opium is a good solution to people's problems.
In 2017, former director of the National Institute of Mental Health, Thomas Insel, confessed to the public, "I spent 13 years at NIMH really pushing on the neuroscience and genetics of mental disorders. And when I look back on that, I realized that while I think I succeeded at getting lots of really cool papers published by cool scientists at fairly large costs, I think $20 billion, I don't think we moved the needle in reducing suicide, reducing hospitalizations, improving recovery for the tens of millions of people who have mental illness. I hold myself accountable for that." In addition to poor recovery, the harmful side effects of psychiatric drugs have been well documented. Individuals can develop akathisia, a movement disorder characterized by a feeling of restlessness, or tardive dyskinesia, which causes stiff, jerky movements of the face and body. The list of side effects continues with weight gain, vomiting, diarrhea, confusion, irritability, and increased risk of suicide. Studies also reveal that taking psychiatric drugs shortens life expectancy.
Everyone is saying we are dying from these side effects.
My cognition was completely destroyed, so I wasn't able to understand new music or understand new, when I was reading books there, I wouldn't be going on to new ones because it was too hard to do.
Services to help people get off psychiatric drugs are nearly non-existent. For those trying to wean off psychiatric drugs, the Icarus Project and Freedom Center have published the Harm Reduction Guide to Coming Off Psychiatric Drugs. Groups such as the Sunrise Center have been running workshops that help people wean off psychiatric drugs. Psychiatric survivor Laura Delano has also founded the Inner Compass Initiative and the Withdrawal Project to connect individuals going through psychiatric drug withdrawal.
It is kind of hard to think about going off medication for some people, and for me, it's a no-brainer.
I found a holistic psychiatrist that works with people off of the medications. So I spoke to him, I started seeing him, and he weaned me off.
It can be difficult to taper people off a psychiatric drug. I have some of the resources on my website, which is called Deadly Medicines. And we have practical tips and tricks when you're tapering patients off. We have an abstinence chart where you can follow your abstinence symptoms day by day. And we have a list of people in many countries who are willing to help people come off psychiatric drugs.
We had Laura Delano come out and do a couple of different workshops, and we got emails from people who said, I hope you get shut down. If we were driven by that fear, we wouldn't be accomplishing much of anything. And so we just assume that's going to happen, and we assume that we're strong enough to survive that, and that there are more people who need that support than are going to try and shut us down.
So if drugs don't work, then what does work? In 2012, Mind Freedom International ran the I Got Better campaign, encouraging psychiatric survivors to share about their recovery. In addition to posting videos and written stories, nearly 400 people completed a survey on what worked best for their recovery. 2/3 of the respondents reported being recovered or fully recovered, and more than half of the respondents reported being free of psychiatric drugs. The survey revealed that people not taking psychiatric drugs were further along in their recovery than those taking them. Mind Freedom concluded that an individual's rejection of the mental health system's hopeless message might actually be a fundamental part of recovery.
I said to myself, even when I was having a rough time, that this can't be it. This can't just be my life. My family's been supportive. Not always, because they didn't understand what was going on with me, but now they do. I can be different, and we can get along. It's okay.
Everybody, I think, has a different journey with it and listening to their own voice. I think it's about coming back to oneself and hearing one's voice, whatever that is for a person. Maybe that transition from pain, victim, survivor to self. And how do you make that journey? And it's also part of the journey, I think. And being in spaces where you can explore that. So you want to be in spaces that aren't telling you what to do. They're not judging you.
I found a lot of helpful things for myself through my own feelings around myself and trusting myself, which was much easier to do when I eventually escaped from the control of psychiatry. When you talk about me and my ways of finding happiness for myself, it wasn't just, doing walking, swimming, whatever I was doing. It was being an activist as long as I was doing that. And while I was being an activist, I was discovering myself far more.
Mind Freedom's I Got Better survey asked people what actually helped. Respondents said they found a variety of alternatives more helpful than psychiatric drugs during mental, emotional distress. And combining multiple treatment tools was far more effective than relying on one alone.
I have been a musician since I was born. I love music. I've always loved it in some shape or form. But I believe all expression things are really good for people. When you can express yourself, you feel much better.
I love both classical music and jazz. I can kind of freeze an anxiety if I have to do a classical solo, and that's because you've got a piece of music and there's one way to play it, and so there's a lot of pressure. But with jazz, one of the great jazz musicians said, you know, the great thing about jazz is that all mistakes just become passing notes.
Things that are meaningful to me, and I do them. So I work a lot. I work a stressful job. I like to do art. I write. There are times of the year, particularly in the winter, in which I don't do much at all, except go to work, you know. And I let that be. I let it be okay. That, okay, so I have high energy times of the year and I have low energy times of the year. As long as I keep the job, as long as I keep going, I'm okay.
A mainstay for me, ability to stay grounded, has been meaningful employment. I think always having some place to go that I felt made a difference.
Having those listening times with each other, taking turns to listen and also to appreciate each other. Another thing is to focus on the good things in life as opposed to the hard things.
Just making sure I get enough sleep. That's always been super important, especially with people who tend to have a lot of energy and kind of fly off in that direction.
I know that if I spend one night awake, I'm already in the danger zone. There was a time when I was coming off of the medications 4 years ago, and I was going through withdrawals, and I could not sleep for weeks. I was drawing crazily for months at a time just to get that extra energy out. And nutrition, I discovered nutrition.
Stopping drinking and marijuana, and I used to smoke cigarettes too. Some books that were really influential to me was Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, Conversations with God, Neil Donald Walsh.
There was one really good one that I stumbled across. It was called Practical Meditation. It was about living in the now.
Whatever outlet, like, you can express those repressed feelings, traumas or whatever. And I've done this, like, write out the trauma, but also talking is very effective too, because someone's listening and you get it all out. Working with some friends or some therapists that will really listen.
And I had a lot of support from really caring professionals that cared about me, asked me what I felt, gave me, choices. That doesn't mean that everyone has that. And, I think we're fighting so that can happen.
I've been in therapy for, I think, decades. Probably use that tool in different versions of it over the years.
Psychotherapy is more than just meeting with a therapist. And it's much more than just talk therapy. The great benefit of psychotherapy is you learn skills and knowledge that you can use for the rest of your life to manage yourself, to manage your thoughts, to use your thoughts, your emotions, your perceptions, your reactions, your behavior, use it in good ways. In psychotherapy, you learn about yourself, whatever your problems are, whatever behavior you're engaging in that you don't like or that's creating problems, whatever the state of being is that's making you miserable, you weren't born that way. That's what happened to you as you grew up. And you had to survive, and you had to find a way to survive. And in the process of surviving and doing the best you can, we all lose parts of ourselves. We all develop limiting beliefs. We all develop fixated responses. And so psychotherapy can help you overcome those. Taking a pill can't. Most psychotherapy sessions last for 50 minutes. The patient knows it's a therapy session, so they're going to bring something in that's troubling them or they want some help with. Probably something having to do with relationships, or with their work, or with how they're feeling. So the therapist is listening and watching what's going on and paying attention to nonverbal behavior. And at some point, the therapist will pick up on an issue that's important. So the therapist will bring it up and say, how would it be if we work on that? The therapist is helping the patient get in touch with something that's bothering him or her, something that they're not feeling good about, that's upsetting, and get some idea about how to move forward. If you look at the research on psychotherapy, where you ask people who received psychotherapy, was it helpful? 80% of them say yes, it was helpful. And the more they received, the more helpful they thought it was. And it turns out that it doesn't make any difference what approach was used. What makes the difference is the relationship between the patient and the therapist. Meet with at least 3 therapists and tell them that you're meeting with them to see whether you want to work with them. Tell them what you want help with and ask them how they would help you, and see which of them makes the most sense to work with.
Mind Freedom International has created the Directory of Alternative Providers, a searchable list of mental health professionals who agree with Mind Freedom's principle of nonviolence and believe in providing choices for their patients. Another form of therapy is peer support, which is the focus of our next segment.